So tonight's topic is planting your garden, and I have made a pretty detailed PowerPoint for us, and my goal with this was so that I could share this PowerPoint with you and you would be able to understand what it was. So I'll also be recording this, or it is being recorded. So hopefully you can reference this if you have any questions, and get to planting your garden because it's 80 degrees in early April. I do want to say don't rush to plant things like tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumber, stuff like that. Those are really warm season stuff, and it's really still too early. We're still at risk for a frost right now, really until the end of April. Our last average day of frost is April 20th, which means that it could frost in early May. It has happened before, and it's usually pretty devastating when it does. But when it gets to be around April 20th, you can check out the 10-day forecast. And if the weather forecast looks good, i.e. nighttime temperatures are going to be above 50 degrees, then you can start planting your tomatoes, peppers, all the warm season stuff. If on April 20th it shows that it's going to be a little cooler, most of those plants don't like nighttime temps to go below 50. It can stunt them. If it gets into the 30s, it could kill them. So just be careful about that. I know a lot of the garden centers around here are starting to sell really nice looking tomatoes and peppers and all that. But unless you are prepared with hoops and row cover frost cloth to protect them, it's too early for that. And even with row cover, I would still probably wait until at least next week. That stuff's usually good for 2 or 3 weeks early. So yeah, don't be too overzealous with the warm season stuff. Even though it's like 80 degrees out today, it could still frost later this month. It's totally possible. It may not. It may just stay warm till May, but that's a risk if you put in tomatoes now, that they may just get killed. So I just want to say that it's totally good to plant peas, lettuce, spinach, onions, all that kind of cool season stuff. I think we detailed that out in the last newsletter we sent out, so you can see those planting recommendations there. If you have any specific questions, feel free to ask about what to plant right now. I can answer that. So, planting your garden. We're going to cover, how to prepare your garden and how to actually physically plant things. We're going to go over fertilizer, preventing weeds up front, because there's a lot you can do now to prevent weeds. And then we'll talk about watering, and we'll talk about setting up trellises. I see, Rosie, are you keeping track of the Q&A? You there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just saw these. Yeah. So your screen sharing did you project the PowerPoint?
Yes. Is it not screen?
It's not showing.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it showing now?
Not for me, no.
Well, this is awkward. All right, what's going on? All right, is anything popped up?
There we go. Yeah, it popped up.
Can I get a few other people to confirm?
It's good.
Yeah,
I can see it.
Can you still eat now?
There we go.
Great. Okay.
There are a couple of questions too. Did you want to do those now or just at the end?
Okay. I'm reading the hay. Hay's always good. I'm going to talk about mulching further in this. Rebecca, I'll talk about that. So I'll talk about that later in the PowerPoint. Okay. All right. So here's the topics we're going to cover. And can you all see my mouse, or is it invisible? I know there's a way that I can kind of.
It's invisible.
It's invisible.
I see your mouse.
I
Do you
can
see
see
my
it. Yeah.
Okay, great. That means I can point at things while I'm talking. All right. So let's get going. What's going on here? Nothing. There we go. All right. Okay. You can see I'm using Zoom meetings. All right. So site preparation. I know I kind of touched on this at the last workshop, but I just wanted to, if you haven't done your tilling yet, if we're not doing your tilling, just make sure that it's dry when you do tilling. I mean, right now is perfect, but I think there's a little rain in the forecast. So you don't want to till or plow when your soil is wet. It will tie up your tilling tines, and it can also damage your soil structure. So, and then I think I mentioned at the last workshop, digging out pathways and kind of hilling up your raised beds. So this is a picture of my garden, and I've actually got all the beds made at this point. This is just the first row I dug out. So basically you dig out the pathway and you pile that soil into your planting area. And then you walk in your pathways and you don't walk in your planting areas. And this kind of helps with, it marks out a place for you to walk, so you don't compact the soil in your planting areas. And also it helps with drainage. It can help things warm up a little more in the spring, although right now we don't really need things to be any warmer. It's pretty good. So this is how I recommend folks to construct their garden beds. So yeah, that's that. And I just put this in here to show you kind of a visual what it actually looks like. Because I think I just had a little Excel doodle in the last handout. So what you need for planting, and you don't need too much, and hopefully all the new gardeners and all the returning gardeners have their trusty trowels, but you need what you're going to plant. Your seeds are your plants. You need some fertilizer, you need a hand trowel, and you need a water source to get those seeds going. So when you go to plant seeds, you want to soak your larger seeds. So this is peas, beans, corn, squash, beets. You want to give them a good soaking. Just 2 to 8 hours is all you need. Any longer than that, I really don't go beyond like 24 hours if at all possible, because you run the risk of drowning your seeds. They need oxygen, so you don't want to do it too long, but for larger seeds, it can help them germinate a little faster. And then you want to read your seed packet, and I think the next slide talks a little bit more about seed packets. But there's a lot of information on the seed packet about spacing and seed depth. But the basic rule of thumb for seed depth is that you put in a seed anywhere from 2 to 4 seed sizes beneath the top of the soil. So for big seeds, they're obviously going to go deeper down than smaller seeds. But so to keep that in mind, so small seeds need to be near the surface, and bigger seeds can go, maybe an inch down. So what I like to do, and here's another picture of that, I like to scratch out a trench for seeds, and then that's where I put the fertilizer in. I don't like scattering fertilizer over the whole planting area or the whole garden. I think that's a great way to fertilize your weeds. So I really like to keep the fertilizer where my plants are going to be. So I scratch out a trench, I space my seeds out in there, and then I just kind of pat the dirt back down. And so I'll talk a little bit about fertilizer, but about 2 tablespoons per row foot. So that's just something you're gonna have to eyeball. It's not, you don't have to be too specific about that, and this is for the Harmony fertilizer that we just gave out, about 2 tablespoons per row foot. And I'll talk in the section on fertilizer. I'll talk specifically about doing larger beds, how much fertilizer to use. So yeah, space the seeds out in the trench, cover with soil, lightly tamp down with a garden rake, and water thoroughly. It's really important that you water seeds every day until they germinate. And some seeds will, like brassicas, like kale or cabbage, stuff like that. I mean, they will germinate, or radishes will germinate in 2 or 3 days. Some things like carrots will take like 3 weeks to germinate. So you really have to get out there every day and water until stuff germinates, because you don't want the seed bed to dry out. And then once stuff has come up, you want to gradually reduce watering over a period of a few weeks until you're watering. And this is if you're watering by hand or watering with an overhead, any kind of overhead watering. You want to be doing it 2 or 3 times a week max. You don't want to water every day.
There's a question, what is a row foot?
Yeah, a row foot is just a foot of row. So with the beds that I've made, I'll go back to this first slide here. My beds are about 2 feet wide, okay? So if you go down the row, so they're 25 feet long and they're 2 feet wide, so that's 50 row feet in each bed. Does that make sense? Like, so it's just the row as it goes down. This is for seeds. So it's just the way that like farmers and market gardeners talk about the row. So each square foot of bed. And so if you do a single row down that, so there's multiple row feet in each bed. So they can go simultaneously. I don't feel like that's making the best sense. Does that make sense? It's just the foot as it goes down the row, or the row, in feet, basically. I feel like I just made that more.
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah. So each of my beds is 25 feet long, but it's 50 row feet because it's 2 feet wide. Okay. And you can have a 3 foot wide bed. And so then it would be 75 row feet in spacing. So each square foot basically needs 2 tablespoons of fertilizer, of the Harmony that we gave out. If you have different kinds of fertilizer, you're gonna have to do some math to figure that out. And I will talk a little bit more about that in the fertilizer section, how you can figure out how much fertilizer that you need. Okay. Where were we? Okay, so seed packets, reading a seed packet. Again, there's lots of good information on your seed packet, and we tried to cram in as much as we could on the seed packets we handed out, telling you as much as we could about the seeds. So usually there's, how deep it needs to go, the final spacing of the mature plants, your days to harvest. This one even contains some information about when to transplant. This is a tomato. So they're telling you to start this indoors 6 to 8 weeks before frost. And then they're telling you the month that you can transplant this. So we're in green zone. So they're saying May to June you transplant. So that makes sense. So if you have questions about your plant, your seeds, usually it's on the back of your seed packet. So consult there first. If you can't find the information that you need, generally you can Google the name of the variety, and you should find plenty of information online about it. So any questions about planting seeds? Okay, I'm gonna move on. So planting plants. And this always feels awkward to say, planting plants, but I'm gonna keep saying it. So when you get your plants in packets, and we will be handing out plants for the program in May, hopefully. Our greenhouse is in North Carolina, which is under pretty strict lockdown, but hopefully we'll be able to get there by May to get our plants. And you can also start seeds in trays. Like if you wanted to get a head start on, say, your cucumbers or your melons or your squash, you could plant them now indoors. And I've got a series of YouTube videos that I've just posted that I can send a link out to y'all by email later that just shows, it's like 5 or 6 videos on seed starting indoors, all the equipment you need, and how to get that done. If you want to get a head start so that you have those plants ready to go by the end of April, I'll send that out. So you have your plants in your trays, and you'll just need to wet them very thoroughly so they're pretty wet before they go in the ground. Make sure you know what your spacings are for your plants, and some plants like lettuce can be crammed in there together. Some plants, they start out kind of small, but they get pretty big. Like the zucchini is going to need 6 to 9 square feet of space by the time it's all said and done. And butternut squash, or some of these big vining squash varieties, may need, I don't know, half your garden. Not really, don't let them get that big, but they can certainly keep growing if you let them. So make sure you know your spacing. And I like to pre-dig my holes before I put, I just know how many plants I'm going to put in. I go down the line at the correct spacing, I measure it out and start digging holes. And then I add a fertilizer, and again, 1 to 2 tablespoons fertilizer per plant. And then I just kind of mix it into each hole so that it's not just sitting on the surface. And then I set the plant in the hole, and then you want to make sure that to not bury the plant too deeply. You really want the surface of the plug to be, just under the surface of your soil. So you don't want the top of the plug to be exposed to the air, then it'll dry out. But you want basically where the stem of the plant meets the roots. You want that to be level with the top of the soil. So just try to keep that the same. The exception to that is tomatoes. I mean, you can basically bury tomatoes up to like the second to the top leaves. They love being buried. The more stem that you bury in the tomatoes, the more roots and they will put out, and the sturdier the plant will be. So feel free to bury your tomatoes pretty deeply. You need to leave a couple leaves, exposed, but tomatoes are the only exception. Everything else really wants to be, they want the soil line to stay where it was from the plugs. Okay, again, tomatoes like to be buried deeply. Now, once you get the plugs into each hole, you want to lightly tamp down the soil around each plant, just kind of press it in, not too hard, but just to kind of make sure there's not too much air around it. And again, water thoroughly, and then water daily for the first week, and then again, gradually decrease. It's the same with the seeds, till you're doing overhead watering 2 or 3 times per week. Okay, any questions about planting plants? Okay, fertilizer. So everyone should have gotten their bag of Harmony fertilizer. And so this is a really nice, good, all-purpose, really nice, balanced organic fertilizer. It's a little smelly. It's made from composted chicken manure, and it smells like it, but it's awesome stuff. So I wanted to talk a little bit about fertilizers and how to read the labels on a fertilizer. So if you don't have Harmony or you run out, so you know what to look for in a bag of fertilizer. So fertilizer bags have these numbers on them. This one says 543. And so the first number is your nitrogen, your second is your phosphorus, your third is your potassium. And nitrogen is good for leaf growth. So leafy greens need a lot of nitrogen. Phosphorus is for root growth. So anything that grows underground needs more phosphorus. And then potassium is for fruiting bodies. So by fruiting body, I mean, your peppers and your squash and your tomatoes. Anything that produces, something with seeds in it, that's your fruiting body. And it needs more potassium. So, and then organic versus synthetic or conventional fertilizer. So organic is made from, materials like chicken manure or cow manure, generally been composted and processed and dried. But there's also all kinds of different stuff. natural mineral products, or the blood or bone meal or alfalfa meal. So it's some kind of natural product that's been turned into a fertilizer. And then synthetic or conventional fertilizer is often made with synthetic materials. So it's not from nature's. A lot of times it's some kind of petroleum product that they're making it out of. So just be aware of that. Organic's usually a little more expensive, and it's a little slower release too, which is a good thing. So a lot of that Miracle-Gro stuff, or any kind of conventional fertilizer, it's basically like pumping steroids into your plants. Yes, they get big and green really quickly, but that's not necessarily good for plant growth or good for the plant. It's not healthy growth for the plant. Whereas like organic is very slow release, so it will feed the plant slowly, more naturally over the course of the summer. So you'll get kind of a slow and steady growth, which makes the plants less attractive to pests. The pests are gonna go for those conventional fertilizer plants because they're big and tender and juicy, and so those big tender juicy plants are going to require then a lot more pesticides in order to keep them healthy, keep the bugs off. So stick with the slower release, and don't look over the fence at your neighbor's yard early in the season, because if they're using the Miracle-Gro, they're going to have bigger plants. But hopefully yours you're gonna stay the course, and your plants will be there at the end of the season. So those numbers are also in percentages. So if you get a soil test and it gives you conventional fertilizer recommendations, this is going to be how you can change it into an organic fertilizer. So those nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium numbers are in percentages. So the 543 means 5% nitrogen, 4% phosphorus, 3% potassium. So if your soil test says that you need to add a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, which is probably a pretty standard recommendation, then you would need to put in apply 20 pounds of the Harmony fertilizer over, that 1,000 square feet. So you get that number by dividing, 1 by 0.05 by 5%. That gets you 20 pounds. So that's how you know. Generally, you want to hit the nitrogen. Most soil tests that I've seen around here don't have a deficiency in phosphorus or potassium. Usually it's nitrogen that people need to put in, and most people have adequate levels of potassium or phosphorus. So for the most part, don't worry about hitting those numbers on the soil test recommendations. Really concentrate on the nitrogen if you're using the Harmony. Now, if you have a deficiency in something, you can use a specific material to get at, and again, I'm going to hand out this PowerPoint, or I'll email it out so everyone will have it. But if you need something, if you need more nitrogen, a lot more nitrogen, and you don't want to apply your entire bag of Harmony to fix it, you can add in something that has more nitrogen in it, like blood meal or feather meal or fish meal, alfalfa meal. A lot of these can be picked up like at Mize Home and Garden Supply or Evergreen. Hopefully you can pick them up. I don't know about if they're still open. A lot of places are still open right now for gardening. So hopefully you can pick up these things if you need them. So phosphorus, my favorite is bone meal. That sounds a little gruesome, but it's a really excellent source of phosphorus. It's also high in calcium, and it does have a little nitrogen in it too. So it's good. You can also go for mineral rock phosphate, and then organic sources of potassium. It's something called green sand. It's just a mineral that you can buy. And then there's something called sunflower hull ash. I don't know if I've ever seen a soil test from this program where they had a deficiency in potassium. We tend to have pretty high levels of potassium in our soils. So, excuse me. Don't worry. Generally, you don't have to worry about potassium, but phosphorus, nitrogen, I do often see deficiencies in. So All right, so Harmony, and again, this is just for that bag of Harmony. It recommends 6 to 8 pounds per 100 square feet. And I measured this out. A pound is about 2.5 cups. So that's 15 to 20 cups per 100 square feet. I would err on the side of going with the lower number unless you have a soil test and it says you need, more nitrogen, and you can go with a higher number there. And this comes out, this is where those 2 tablespoons per square foot comes from. It's just from this math. And again, I don't recommend, and the label on the bag says to just scatter it all over your garden. But I don't like doing this because, again, you're feeding your weeds. I really just like putting the fertilizer directly into the planting hole or the seed trench, so that the plants get it and the weeds do not. All right, any questions so far about fertilizer? Has anyone done a soil test and gotten results back?
I did a soil test, but I didn't get anything back.
You haven't got it back yet? Okay. Well, maybe it's just taking a minute. But if you have any questions about soil tests or how to interpret it. Okay, we got a couple questions.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions about your soil test, or if you need help converting their conventional recommendations into organic, go ahead and just email me. They should, at this point, send it to you as a PDF, so you can just forward it to me and I can see it. So put fertilizer on the top of the hole or mix it in. Mix it into your planting hole in your trench. So before you put the plant in or the seeds in, just kind of scratch it in. And then we also asked how often to reapply fertilizer. And I would do it about halfway through the planting season. So probably in like 6 to 8 weeks after you plant. And this is for stuff that's going to be in the ground all season. Stuff that comes in and out like lettuce, probably that first, you don't need to keep fertilizing it because it's only in there for, 4 or 5 weeks. So, but tomatoes, peppers, stuff that's going to be in the ground for many months, 6 to 8 weeks in, you probably want to give another round of fertilizer, and then that just goes on the surface of the soil and you can just lightly scratch it in. Not too deeply because you'll hit the roots. But yeah, just kind of get it in a little bit so it's not just sitting directly on top of the soil. And then where can you get a soil test done? You can do that. You can call your county extension office. And I don't think they're letting people come into the offices anymore, but you can call and see if they can get you a soil test kit. And basically it's just a little box and some instructions for how to take the soil test. So, and then you just mail that test in. You have to go probably to the post office. In normal years, you can take that box filled with soil and you can go back to the extension office and you can pay your fee and they will mail it for you, but I don't know what they're doing right now. So you'll have to call your extension agent, your local county extension agent, which you can find online, and figure out what they're doing for tests at this moment. I don't know. Okay, is that everyone's questions?
Yeah.
Great. Sorry guys, I have to get some water really quickly. Apparently can't talk without drinking water. All right, I'm back. Is the county office the only place you can get a soil test? There are lots of private labs where you can get soil tests done, and a lot of times those private labs are cheaper. That's just something you can Google. There's one that I've used in the past called Waters, agriculture testing, I think it's called, like water as in water. So yeah, and I think they're like half the cost of the county extension offices. The county extension offices are just very easy to access, but there are plenty of private labs out there that you can mail your dirt to.
Rochelle said that the co-op had a sign on their door that there were soil tests for $10.
Okay. Yeah. So the farmers co-op in each county. Yes, I've heard they do soil tests too. And they're usually a little cheaper than the county agents because they're expecting you to then buy your fertilizer from them once you get your results in. So they can be a little better of a deal. Yes, for sure. Yeah. So there's plenty of options. So it's just whatever is easy and convenient for you. Okay, next topic, preventing weeds with mulch. If there's one thing that you learned from this gardening program, it's that you should mulch and mulch deeply. It's the single best thing you can do to save time and energy, on the front end of your garden is just to pile on the mulch. It blocks light from hitting the surface, so it prevents weeds from germinating. And the weeds that do germinate and grow through your mulch are going to be very easy to pull up. So it's going to vastly reduce your weeds and make the ones that do come up much easier to pull out. So it conserves water and it prevents the soil from drying out. So you're going to be watering less with mulch. It can prevent soil-borne diseases from spreading. And the way a lot of these soil-borne diseases work is that rainwater hits the soil and it splashes dirt up onto the leaves of the plant. And so those microbes that are in the soil are now on the leaves of the plant. And this is especially true with tomatoes. There's several pretty bad soil-borne diseases. And even if it's a new garden, those microbes may be just hanging out in the soil, just waiting for rain to splash them up onto the plant. So if you have mulch over the soil, that rain is not splashing that soil up onto those leaves. Mulch can deter some pests. It can prevent. I think Colorado potato beetles get really confused in mulch, and so they have a harder time finding your potatoes. And it also provides habitat for predatory beetles and spiders. I'm sorry if you hate spiders, but they're actually really awesome. Please don't kill them. The more spiders you have in your garden, the more of the bad bugs they are eating. But there's also predatory beetles that live in mulch, and they will be out there hunting down the bad bugs, 24/7. So yeah, it's good. And then also that as all that mulch decays over the season, it's going to feed the worms and all the good bugs in the soil, and it's going to decompose down into soil organic matter, which is pretty important for healthy soil. So and I'm sure I'm forgetting some benefits to mulch. It's just very beneficial. So mulch often, mulch deeply for your garden. So what can you use for mulch? And I'm really not talking about wood chips here or bark. Those dyed things that are funny colors that you can buy from the garden supply store. That's really not what I'm talking about, and I don't recommend using that at all. If you do have wood chips or bark from a source, like you had a tree cut down or something and they chipped a bunch of stuff, you can let that sit in piles for at least a year. 2 or 3 years is probably great for that wood to break down. And then that would make great mulch once it's been aged for a while. But straw or old hay is good. You just want to be careful of seed heads, and hay tends to have seed heads in it. But I've definitely bought straw bales with seed heads in it too. So you just kind of have to be aware of it. If you see it starting to pop up, that you need to kill it quickly so it doesn't take root and grow. Shredded leaves, especially in the fall, is a really good one. You can get shredded leaves delivered if you live inside the city limits. You can also, if you have a bag on your lawnmower, you can collect the grass clippings and the shredded leaves together. That's a really awesome mulch, and you can just pile that onto your garden. Don't put that on the curb. That's good stuff. If you are in an office environment and you have access to shredded paper, it looks really odd, but you know, it's about as good as shredded leaves for mulching. So maybe it looked like it snowed under your tomatoes with that white paper, but it's great mulch. So if you have access to that, go for it. Other organic waste, this could mean like spent grains from a brewery. I've seen people like mulching with like seaweed if they live on the coast. So it's just whatever kind of organic matter, organic waste that you have, you know, can go to the mulch. Compost is perfectly fine to mulch, although you know, maybe put an inch or two of compost down and then put something like straw or something over that. You know, 4 or 6 inches of that over the compost. I don't think you want to mulch with like 6 inches of compost. That would get really expensive, but it is good.
We have a few questions.
Uh-huh.
One, how closely to the plants do you mulch?
Really right up to the base of the plants. And
Can
what
you repeat that? I did not hear the first part.
sorry, right up to the base of the plants. So if I'm really prepared, I like to lay the mulch down first if I'm putting plants in. Put the mulch down and then just kind of clear out a small space for the plant, dig the hole, put the fertilizer in, and then pop the plant in directly into the mulch. So I don't hill, and then the other one was how much do you put mulch on planted potatoes since you have to hill? I don't hill my potatoes. I honestly put those potatoes down like a foot. I dig the deepest hole that I can and put the potato down at the bottom of that and let it grow through, you know, a foot of soil rather than planting it more shallow and then trying to hill it up. But if you did want to hill it up, you could, like the straw, you would just kind of have to move it out of the way maybe if you can. But the nice thing about the straw is that if there are potatoes popping out on the surface, the straw is there covering them so they're not getting exposed to the light. So that is beneficial. But yeah, it's not necessarily compatible with hilling potatoes. And then I don't think roly-poly bugs indicate, I don't think they're that harmful. I do occasionally see them eating fruit or like tomatoes, but I feel like that's like after something else has eaten the tomato and they're just kind of like in there. So no, I don't think roly-polies indicate anything. I think they're just kind of there. So that's my experience anyway. I've never heard anyone complaining about them, like overrunning their garden or anything. So I think you're okay. Yeah, so 6 inches of material is pretty good. Yeah, spread the mulch, put them in directly in. If you're directly sowing something, obviously, so mulch prevents sunlight and prevents seeds from germinating. So you don't want to put your seeds in and then mulch immediately. You need to wait for the seeds to germinate, and then you probably want them to get 4 to 6 inches tall at least before you add in your mulch. And then, yeah, any weeds that emerge through the mulch, you want to pull pretty quickly. They should be pretty easy to pull up. And you definitely don't want to let any weeds go to seed. It's really important. And then another thing, and I'm experimenting with this year, is using landscape fabric. And so this is kind of a woven polypropylene fabric. It's partially permeable to water, but not 100%. And so it's really best if you combine it with drip irrigation. And then if you are using landscape fabric, you don't want to cut it because that can cause the fabric to fray. So it's best to burn holes in it. So here's a picture of a guy. He's made a little cutout with some plywood, and he is burning holes into his landscaping fabric. So I tried this and it's a little harder than it looks because that fabric likes to set on fire if you leave the torch on it a little too long. So be aware that it's a very fast process with that. But the nice thing is that it blocks sunlight also. And then it's reusable if you take care of it it's reusable for 3 to 5 years. So it's kind of an investment. You might spend, $100 on a roll of good landscaping fabric, but you can reuse it for 3 to 5 years. And it will go a long way. And this is used a lot on organic farms where, they're not using these kind of high-powered herbicides to kill their weeds. So they have to go out and weed manually. And if you're working on, an acre or two of land, having something that blocks the weeds from coming up is very helpful. And on a large scale, this landscape fabric is cheaper than trying to get all that mulch in there. So it's definitely an option if you want to spend the money on it. And hopefully it'll work in my garden. I'm trying it out this year. So, okay. Trellising. So we may try to hand out T-posts in May. It just depends on how all this social distancing stuff goes on. I would really love to hand out, trellising materials to you, but we'll see how that goes for now. So trellising helps you do vertical gardening. And so it helps you make more room in your garden by bringing things up vertical rather than having them sprawling on the ground. So like a cucumber or a tomato, may take up like 6 or 10 row feet if they're just allowed to sprawl on the ground. But if you put them up on a trellis, then they're only taking up 1 square foot of your garden space because they're growing up rather than out. So trellises are good for tomatoes, cucumbers, small melons, and small winter squash. I would not try to do larger melons and squash on up a trellis because it'll probably be too heavy and it may drag the netting down, and B, if it becomes ripe and falls off, it's going to splat. So pole beans are the last one that you want to grow up on a trellis. And then you want to put trellises in, as you are planting. You don't want to wait too long after planting to get your trellises in because you will be pounding those posts into the ground. And if you wait too long, the plant roots are going to be expanding out. So you might hit the roots and damage the plant that way. So you really want them to go in. And also as these are vining crops and they grow pretty quickly. So if you're trying to get these kind of longer vines up on a new trellis, after the fact, you may break a vine or plant off trying to get it up on the trellis. So it's better to put the trellis in when you plant, and that way you can train these kind of smaller plants up the trellis so you're not going to damage the plant later. So again, I like T-posts. You can buy wooden tomato stakes to make trellising, but I don't think they're strong enough. These metal T-posts are pretty much indestructible. They go in the ground, and then you can put, I like to get this Horta Nova netting, and hopefully we'll be giving this out in May also. So you basically just attach it to your post with zip ties, and this netting is nice. It lasts, it's UV resistant, so you can reuse it 4 or 5 years, before it starts to degrade in the sunlight. So as long as you take it in the winter, it is nice. Most posts for the trellising needs to be 5 to 8 feet apart. For tomatoes, I like to do about 5 feet apart, because tomatoes can get really heavy really quickly. So with the tomatoes, I don't use the netting. I use twine. So this can be like sisal twine, or it can be plastic twine. It's whatever you've got on hand. And then we do something called the floor to weave, which sounds like, I guess, a hairstyle, but it's a way of putting your tomatoes in. And it is used by commercial growers. And so, this is something they do on, hundreds of acres. So it works really well. But basically, you're just weaving the twine around the T-posts and around the plants, so that you're building the trellis up as the tomatoes grow. And I have another video about this on the Build It Up YouTube channel, that kind of demonstrates this in action. So you want to start when the tomatoes are about 12 inches tall. You don't want to wait until they start flopping over. You need to get them while they're still upright, and then do the first couple rounds of twine, and then every 6 inches or so you want to put another line of twine in. So you're really building the trellis around the plant and kind of keeping up with the growth. Again, if it gets too tall and flops over, you're going to run the risk of breaking the plants as you try to get them back into the floor to weave. Question?
Question from Zia: Is squash or melon easier to grow? How can we grow melon well?
The secret to growing melon well is to water it a lot. They like a lot of water. And I've given out the cantaloupes, the sugar cube, I think is the variety name. It's a really easy to grow cantaloupe. And that will grow up a trellis. I've done that before. You just have to watch it. When it gets ripe, they will slip off the vine. So you kind of have to you just have to, when they start looking like they're getting ripe, you have to be out there every day, checking them so they don't fall off the netting. And then the watermelon are also on the smaller size. They didn't give you any big honkin' watermelon. They're mostly the kind of 6 to 8 pound watermelons. And if that still sounds like a lot, most standard watermelons are like 10, 15, 20 pounds. So that's a smaller melon. But again, they like to be watered really, really well. Did that answer your question, Zia? I'm going to take that as a yes, unless you have more questions.
Yeah.
Type in another question.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right. Okay, so watering and irrigation. So you need a plan for how you're going to water your garden up front. I had a gardener one year who was like, I'm going to use a bucket. And because their garden, they located it way far away from their house, and it would have been really expensive to buy that much hosing to run water out there. But I think I mentioned this at the last workshop, your garden needs at least 1 inch of water every week, and an extra inch for every day above 90 degrees. And we're probably going to get some of those scorching days in, late July, August, where it's just going to be 90 degrees for most of the week. So you're going to be watering most of the week. So 1 inch of water is 2/3 of a gallon per square foot. So if you have a 500 square foot garden, then that's going to be 330 gallons of water each week. So that's a lot of buckets to be hauling to your garden. So you want a plan. And first off, it does rain. So it's good to know how much rain is hitting your garden, so you can get a cheap little rain gauge from the hardware store or wherever. And just set that out in your garden so you can know how much it's rained that week. Just set a day like Sunday or something so that every week you're going to go out and empty your rain gauge. So you're not being like, is this from this week or last week? So how much you're getting that week. So just pick a day when to empty your rain gauge. And also you can track precipitation totals. There's a website called Weather Underground, and they have a calendar view. So you can see, what it's rained in that month or that week, and you can kind of add that up. So last Wednesday, it rained, 0.8 inches. And tomorrow and Wednesday again, it's supposed to rain. So, another approximately 0.3 inches. So if this forecast holds out, which I don't see why it wouldn't, this close in, we're gonna have our inch of water for this week. So you wouldn't need to then add more water to the garden, because you can just total it up and say, all right, we've had enough rain. I don't need to add more. So unless you've just planted something. If you've just planted something, then you want to water every day for the first week or so, just to kind of get it acclimated. It's also really awesome if you do look at the forecast and you say, oh, tomorrow it's going to rain. Rain is really great. And if you can plant things right before it rains, that stuff's going to do way better than if you're, a week of no rain and you're trying to bring that water in as best you can. So timing plantings for rain is always a great decision. So, you get home from work. Well, no one's going to work these days, I guess. Whatever. If you look at the forecast and you're like, oh, it's going to rain tomorrow, it's a good decision to run out to the garden and start planting stuff for that rain.
We have one question. Do you have any tips for setting up drip irrigation?
Yes, I will talk about that in a slide or two. Ours is you have a fancy drip irrigation. Okay, she has a rain gauge and can set up zones. Let me think on that for a second. Good question though. Okay, so yeah, we'll get into different types of watering. So watering by hand, you've got a hose. You need to, so again, you're looking for 2/3 of a gallon per square foot. So you need to know what your flow is. So I would recommend getting like a 1 or 2 gallon vessel, bucket, whatever, and then just timing how long it takes you to fill up that bucket. And then that's how long you're going to, approximately you're going to need to water every plant in your garden. So this isn't a get out there and take, 3 minutes and consider your garden, watered, unless you have a really, really tiny garden. You're going to need to be out there holding that hose, and remember, you want to water the roots, not the leaves. Please don't spray your leaves as much as possible. So you're going to be bending down with your hand hose, for 10 or 15 seconds per plant out in your garden in order to get the amount of water that they need. It's best if you water early in the morning, if you can at all possible. So you're up before dawn, watering your plants by hand. That's not ideal. So the next option is to get an overhead sprinkler. I think this is about $40. I've had this thing for a few years. It's pretty great. It's pretty effective. It's just a rotating impact sprinkler, little tripod. And I think this does about, has a radius of like 20 or 30 feet. So it can get a pretty good sized garden. And again, some kind of rain gauge is good in the vicinity of the sprinkler, just so you know if you run it for an hour or two, how much water you're getting on your plants. If you don't have a rain gauge, running it for 1 or 2 hours, 2 or 3 times a week is probably going to get you the water that you need. And then again, water early in the morning. This is really important for disease prevention. If you're watering late at night, late in the day, those leaves and you get the leaves wet, those leaves aren't going to have time to dry off. And so you're going to go into the cool, dark night with water on your leaves, and that's going to allow fungi and bacteria to grow more so than if you watered early in the morning and they dried off and there's no medium for them to grow in the night. Again, you're watering for 1 to 2 hours. It's easy to forget that it's out there running, or it's easy to forget in the morning to turn it on. So I like to combine this kind of thing with an auto timer, directly. Just the timer screws into your spigot, and then your hose screws into the timer, and you can set it to run how, you can set so that it's automatic and you don't have to think about watering as much. All right, drip irrigation. this is the most expensive thing you can do, but it's probably the most effective and most efficient. I think it uses like half or maybe even a third of the amount of water that an overhead sprinkler uses, but it goes directly to the roots of the plants. There's less evaporation. It's not hitting your leaves at all. So it's more effective at getting water where it needs to go. Even a small basic irrigation kit's going to run you, you know, $100, maybe $180, which is a lot. But you have to think a lot of these parts are going to last for 5 or more years. So if you spend $150, you know that you're averaging maybe $30 a year over 5 years, and you have to compare that with the amount of time you spend hand watering. And I think you will see, you know, benefit in doing that. The actual drip tape, which is the part that is running, you know, through your plants, that needs to be replaced fairly frequently, every 1 to 3 years, usually with that. And you'll need to inspect, if you are reusing it, you'll need to inspect it at the beginning of each year because it tends to puncture easily. You know, you'll have to replace it if you've got a hole, an unplanned hole in your drip tape. It does have holes in it. That's how the water gets out, but they're like little valves basically, and so they're pressure sensitive. If you just puncture a hole into it, it's just going to spray water everywhere. Again, this is really good to pair with an auto timer, especially. Now, drip irrigation needs to run, according to the kit that I just purchased, an hour every day of the week to deliver 1 inch of water. So I've ordered a timer to go with it so that I'm not having to run out there and turn it on every day. With the overhead stuff, you know, try not to water more than 2 or 3 times a week is best. You want to water deeply and infrequently. With the drip irrigation, just given the nature of the way it works, infrequent daily or daily light irrigation is what they recommend. So just follow your manufacturer's recommendations for that.
How can you tell if you're watering too much?
You can see it kind of pooling in your garden, but you're not necessarily, so you're really going to see overwatering when it gets really hot. So if you water too much, that encourages the roots of the plants to stay at the top of the soil. The plants don't have to work very hard because you're putting water in every day. And so they're up at the surface of the soil. So then when it gets really hot, those plants are more likely to droop, and they're going to need water more frequently because they don't have strong root systems. So by watering just twice a week or 3 times a week, you know, and watering very deeply, you know, that water is going to drain down into the soil on the days that you aren't watering, and those roots are going to follow it down deeper into the soil. So they're going to be in the deeper, cooler areas of the soil. So when it gets blazing hot, those roots are covered, you know, they're not towards the surface. And so that's when you'll see the benefits of these kind of deeper waterings, is when it gets really hot. So yes, your plants will look good if you water them every day, but you're not building strong, resilient plants. You're building plants that are addicted to you watering them every day. So it just becomes this kind of self-fulfilling cycle. So I'm not sure that you could like flood. I mean, you probably could flood your garden if you tried really hard, but that would take a doing. So I'm not sure there's like visible signs necessarily of putting too much water, other than, you know, you're creating kind of weaker plants. Does that answer that, Vanessa? Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, Jennifer, I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on drip irrigation. I'm really just trying to dip my toes into the water this year with it. So I would maybe call up the folks that you bought the system from and ask them. I think the point of zones is that it's hard to run. So it can be hard sometimes if you're, especially with a well, to water an entire garden or farm all at once. So you set up zones, so you're just watering, you know, what the carrying capacity of your well at any one time. I think that's the point of zones. So I'm not sure that the plants in it necessarily matter too much. But I would call the the folks that are selling you drip irrigation know their stuff, and they can really help you answer that question better than I can. Is that good enough of an answer?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. That is the end of my little presentation. And that took about an hour, and that's exactly how much time I wanted to take with it. So any more questions about this, what I just talked about, or whatever, please feel free to just unmute yourself if you are able to, and talk away. And I will, this is being recorded, and I will send out this recording and the PowerPoint to you so y'all can see it. And I'm going to allow all these people to talk if you need to. Okay. All right. So,
What are your thoughts on volunteer plants from last year?
usually they're okay. Sometimes things can cross and you can get a weird brand new plant. So, excuse me. Usually you can get some fun squash going that way. Hold on. I mean, with volunteers, I'm usually pretty curious as to what they're gonna do, so I usually leave them. But they're, if you've got a tight plan going and you don't have room for them, you know, you're obliged to keep them if you don't want them. Other questions?
Lexi, what is your favorite plant to grow?
Ooh, I'm really a big fan of winter squash, I think. I usually put way too much winter squash.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
Is there some herbs that are perennial that are good to keep around?
Yeah, and I think we are giving out, don't hold me to this, it's whatever's on that list. I think sage and thyme and lavender we're giving out, and those are perennials. So I would put those in a separate spot or in a corner of your garden. I wouldn't put them like in the middle of your garden because they are going to be there for multiple years. So you want them in a spot that's convenient for you. Parsley is a biennial, so it sticks around for 2 years. It's one of those funny plants, but the basil, dill, cilantro are annual, so they're only there for 1 year, so you can stick them wherever. I like, and there's also rosemary. I don't think we're giving out rosemary, but it's a good perennial. It's a little bit cold sensitive, so if we get a really hard frost, like below like 10 degrees, that can kill your rosemary, but a lot of winters, the rosemary will survive. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
We can grow most herbs. Here, oregano is another one. That's a perennial. And like the cilantro and the dill often will self-seed, so I will let those seeds just fall to the ground, and then you've kind of got your dill and your cilantro coming up. They can get a little weedy, but for the most part, they can. Do we have another question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. If I plant potatoes, because I had the potato question, so I normally heel my potatoes. But if I don't do that and I just fill like my 12-inch bed full, will they still sprout if I stick them down in the very bottom?
Yes. They will grow. They will grow through that soil. Oh yeah. I bury them. I mean, I'll bury them as deep as I feel like digging.
Okay.
And they come up. Yeah, and then you don't have to hill. You can put a pretty thick layer of mulch down too, so that the ones that are towards the surface don't turn green. It's less work.
Yeah.
Especially, are you doing, did you say, so you have a raised bed?
All mine are raised beds.
Yes. So you're not gonna want to get in there and hill anyway. So
Right. I did them in pots last year, like really big pots, but this year I have a smaller bed. It's like 3x4.
yeah.
But it's like 12 or 13 inches deep. So I was just gonna put all potatoes in that.
Yeah, just fill it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You might get you get a few more potatoes by hilling up, but honestly, it's never bothered me. You get enough potatoes, I think.
Okay.
If you don't have another question, I'm going to stick you back on mute. Anyone else? All right. Well, if you think of anything, just email me. I'm happy to respond by email to questions. Again, I'll send all this out to you in a few days, if not tomorrow. And happy gardening. I think it's supposed to rain tomorrow. So if you want to get out in the last rays of light and plant stuff, have at it. It'll be fun. Okay. I will. Oh, did we get more questions?
No, just thanks.
Thank you. You're welcome, y'all. And we'll talk to you. I'll do another webinar probably in May, and we'll figure out, I have to figure out how to get the plant